Good morning students. Welcome to yet another video of Geography Chapter 1 Resources and Development. In the previous class we completed soil erosion and soil conservation. In today's class we will have a quick recap of the entire chapter Resources and Development. First let's recall what is the meaning of the term resource. A resource is something which is available for us in the nature, whether it is living or dead, that satisfy human needs can be termed as resource. Example, flora, fauna, bacteria, soil and so on. Everything which is available in our environment which can be used to satisfy our need provided it is technologically accessible, economically feasible and culturally acceptable, then such things can be termed as resource. Now let's move on to the next page, that is types of resources or else the classification of resources. So first let's analyze the classification of resources on the basis of origin. So resources that obtained from biosphere and have life such as human beings, flora and fauna, fisheries, etc. So biotic means living. So the meaning of the term biosphere is where the living organisms exist. The next is abiotic resources. Abiotic resources means the things which are obtained of non-living things is known as abiotic resources. Examples, rocks, minerals, soil, land and so on. Let's move on to the next classification. The next is on the basis of exhaustibility, resources are divided into two, renewable resources and non-renewable resources. So renewable resources means the resources which can be replenishable or else that can be renewed or reproduced by physical, chemical and mechanical process, and it can be used for one generation to another. Examples, solar energy, wind energy, wildlife and so on. The renewable resources are further classified into two, continuous or flow. Now let's move on to the next type of classification, that is on the classification of resources on the basis of ownership. Here it is explaining about individual, national and international resources. So first let's analyze what is individual resource. Individual resources that are owned by individuals is known as, any resource which is owned by an individual is known as individual resource. For example, the property of an individual or the plot or else the houses, plantation, farming land, all these are the examples for individual resources. Then next is community resources. Community resources means the resources which are accessible to all the members of the community, that is known as community resource. Example, grazing ground, burial ground, village pond and so on. All these are the examples for community resource. Next let's analyze what is national resource. National resource means the resources that belongs to the nation is known as national resource. Then it is explaining that basically every resources belong to the nation, but some resources are equally distributed and some resources are not. For example, land is not equally distributed to everyone. It is based on payment. If you pay more money, you will get a larger piece of land. Then examples of the national resources are national roads, railways, canals and so on. The next is international resources. So for this we have international institutions and bodies like the United Nations and other such bodies. And one good example of the international resource is the oceanic resources. Now let's move on to the next classification, that is classification of resources on the basis of the status of development. On the basis of the status of development, resources are classified as Developed resources, potential resources, stock and reserves. First, let's analyze what is potential resource. Potential resource is a resource which is available in a particular region but has not been utilized to the full capacity. That is known as potential resource. Example, in western parts of India, Rajasthan and Gujarat, we have enormous potential for the development of wind and solar energy, but we have not tapped that properly. The next is developed resources. The resources which are surveyed and their quality and quantity have determined. These resources are currently being used. Such kind of resources are known as developed resources. Now let's move on to the next division, that is explaining about stock and reserves. First, let's analyze what is stock. Stock, the simple meaning of stock is we have a stock of something but we have not used that. It means we have that stock of a particular thing and then we have not used it, is still in the form of stock. That is known as stock. Similarly, materials in the environment which have the potential to satisfy human needs but we don't have the appropriate technology to harness it. That is known as stock. For example, hydrogen is available all around us, but hydrogen and oxygen are two gases which can be used as water by mixing, but we don't have the technology to harness it. Now let's move on to the next heading, that is reserve. What do you mean by reserve? Reserve is a subset of stock which can be put into use with the help of existing technology but its use has been postponed for future, is called reserve. Then now move on to the next heading, that is development of resources. The simple meaning of development of resources is planning of resources. So human beings used the resources indiscriminately, and this has led to the following problems like depletion of resources for satisfying the greed of few individuals. It means human greed is the reason behind the depletion of resources. Then the speed at which we are consuming the resources, it's soon going to be exhausted. Next is accumulation of resources in few hands. It means only rich and few have access to certain resources. For example, in India, how the Reliance Industries control the electricity as well as the oil part of the natural resource. Similarly, we have Tata Steel and few other competitors who controls the iron part. In India, we have few people controlling the large chunk of resources. Global warming, ozone layer depletion, environmental pollution, all are the cause of unthoughtful use of resources. Now let's move on to the next topic, explaining about sustainable development. So sustainable development means the development which does not harm the environment, and the recent development does not overlook or damage the needs and requirements of the future generation, is known as sustainable development. So sustainable development means using the resources in such a manner that it is still available for the future generation. Next is resource planning in India. Now let's move on to the next heading, resource planning. So resource planning, it means the resources, it means the judicious use of resources, that is known as resource planning. The resources are distributed in our country in an uneven manner. Few people will get a plenty of resources and few people will get very less. So to bridge this gap, we need resource planning. So here certain examples are given in your textbook, like it means certain points are highlighted here. It means like how can we plan resources, or else what are the steps we need to take to plan resources effectively. So the next points are explaining that the steps in resource planning. So the first step it is explaining here, it is you can see in the textbook. The first step is it means to identify which state is having which resource in abundant and which resource is scarce. It means identifying the resource, that is the identifying the resources across the country. That is the first step for resource planning. Then when I told you it is identify the resources, so the question will come, how to identify the resource. This involves surveying, mapping, qualitative and quantitative estimation and measurement of resources by the geologist. So the geologist will analyze what quantity of a particular coal is left out in our country and what is the grade of that particular resource. All this will be analyzed by the geologist. So all these will come under the category of resource planning. Now let's move on to the next heading, that is explaining about land resources. So what do you mean by land resources? So here also here you can see a pie diagram explaining the important relief features in India. In percentage wise it is highlighting that. So it is highlighting that major percentage, it means 43% of our relief feature is plain, then followed by mountains, and then 27% is plateau region. Then the next is explaining about land utilization. So land is utilized for forest, and then land not available for cultivation, then other cultivated land, fallow land. Again fallow land also division is there, current fallow land and other than current fallow, then net zone area. Okay. So here it is explaining that forest area, so it means to maintain the ecological balance, 33% of the land need to be preserved as forest area. Then land not available for cultivation means the land which we are not using for cultivation purpose. Under this again it is divided into two, barren and waste land and land put to non-agricultural uses. Land put to non-agricultural uses means that lands which we are utilizing to construct a building, road, factories and so on. Then other cultivated land excluding the fallow land, there includes the permanent pastures, grazing land, so on. Then move on to fallow land. Fallow land means fallow lands are those land which are meant for agricultural purpose, but due to certain reasons agriculture has not been performed for several years and the land is completely empty. Such kind of a land is known as fallow land. The next point is explaining about net zone area. Net zone area means it is the total area where the crops are sowed, which means the land is functional for agricultural purpose. Then for example NSA, the net zone area that varies from one state to another, and it is over 80% of the total area in Punjab and Haryana and less than 10% in Arunachal Pradesh, Mizoram, Manipur, Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It means the net zone area that will vary from state to state. It varies from one state to another. The next is explaining about the land use pattern in India. So the use of land is determined by the physical as well as the human factors. Physical factors means the topography, soil type, climate, and so on. Human factors is the population, population density, technological capability, culture, and culture and traditions, and so on. So there is a difference between land in the plain area and land in the mountain area. The plain area is more good for cultivation. In the mountainous area, it is not good for agriculture, agricultural purpose. The mountainous area is not suitable for agricultural purpose. And similarly, the climate also played an important factor. If the climate is cold, the land in that region is suitable only for certain type of crops like tea plantations. So it is famous in mountainous region of Darjeeling and in the hills of Coromandel regions in south. Both the places, if you analyze the climate is extreme cool climate. So both these places have mountainous terrain, and both these places are comparatively cooler than other parts of the country. So that's all about this heading. Now let's move on to the next heading, that is land degradation and conservation measures. So if we used to exploit exploit the land in so many ways, then obviously it will be degraded, the land will be degraded. Land degradation is any change in characteristics of land which reduces its quality or decreases its fertility is called land degradation. So some of the degradation is direct and some are indirect. And let's analyze the reasons. What are the reasons of land degradation? I'll just mention you. Here you can see the reasons of land degradation: deforestation, then dumping industrial waste in water bodies or else even in the flat land, overgrazing, mining, quarrying, then urbanization. All these are the examples of land degradation. Now let's move on to the next topic, or is the last topic of this chapter, that is soil. So soil, as I said, after land, soil is the important resource, and soil is a renewable resource, and soil is very important for the growth of the plants, and the soil supports different types of living organisms on the earth. And soil is formed mainly due to the process of weathering, and as a result of weathering, a layer of loose rock materials is formed on the land surface. Then let's move on to the classification of soil. Here you can see various classification. Soil is divided into, or else classified into, alluvial soil, then black soil, red soil, laterite soil, forest soil, arid soil, and so on. Alluvial soil, as I said, it is the best, it is a suitable soil for agriculture, and it is widespread in India, and this soil is further divided into two heads, Bhangar and Khadar. And Bhangar is also is known as old alluvium soil, and Khadar is known as new alluvium soil. Now let's move on to the other type of soil, that is black soil. Black soil is also known as Regur soil, and it is commonly seen in the Deccan Plateau region. It is good for cotton cultivation, and black soil, it is mainly of volcanic origin. And then the black soil is sticky in nature, and it is very rich in calcium carbonate, potash, magnesium, and lime, but it is poor in phosphorus. Now the next type of soil, red and yellow soil. So red and yellow soil, it is found on crystalline igneous rocks in areas of low rainfall in the eastern and southern parts of Deccan Plateau. And the red color of the soil is due to the diffusion of the iron, which is present in the crystalline igneous rocks. Once it is diffused, it gives the red color to the soil. However, the same soil will becomes yellow when it is hydrated with water. Next is the what we learned is the laterite soil. So, laterite soil is seen in areas of high temperature and heavy rainfall. It is due to the intense leaching activity of the rainfall. The soil does not have enough humus. It is good for manures and fertilizers commonly seen in the southern parts and the coastal areas. Now the next soil type is the arid soil. Arid means dry. So this type of soil is found in the desert regions, especially in the Thar desert regions. It is common to the areas of dry climate where we have high temperature and fast evaporation. It is red to brown in color, and this soil lacks humus and moisture. Next is forest soil. So, forest soil. Forest soil is seen in the hilly and the mountainous areas and silt deposits, which are seen towards the valley sides. We have hills and the valleys. Towards the valleys, we have the loam and silty soil. However, towards the upper range, the soil is much more coarse or much more bigger particles as compared to the lower regions where the particles are much finer. That's all about soil or the types of soil. Now, the last part, we will move on to the soil erosion. What do you mean by soil erosion? The denudation of the soil cover and subsequent washing down is described as soil erosion. The soil erosion is caused due to human activities like deforestation, overgrazing, construction and mining, etc. Also, there are some natural forces like wind, glacier and water which lead to soil erosion. Soil erosion is also caused due to defective methods of farming. Now, the last topic is the different ways for soil conservation. So, the first it is explaining about contour ploughing. I already explained you what you mean by contour ploughing. So, contour ploughing, terrace cultivation, strip cropping and shelter beds. These are the different ways which we can prevent soil erosion, or else the different ways for soil conservation. So, by this we completed the summary of the chapter Resources and Development. In the next class, we will start with Political Science, Chapter 2, Federalism. If you have any doubts related to this chapter, you can mail to dmcsonlinequeries@gmail.com. Thank you, students. Have a good day ahead.